Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm taking a break from the coronavirus to look at an interesting behavioural experiment I heard about that was being run in a rather unusual location. That location was a museum. You might just about remember those. And the museum in question is in the beautiful city of Bremen in northern Germany. As well as its architecture and maritime history, Bremen is famous for being the home of Beck's Beer, Werder Bremen Football Club, and giving its name to a Brothers Grimm fairy tale called the Bremer Stadtmusikanten, or the Town Musicians of Bremen. Links to all of those are in the show notes. It's also the home of the Weserburg Museum of Modern Art, which recently conducted a behavioural experiment to see whether shifting the pricing model it used for entrance fees would change visitor patterns and perceptions. As regular listeners to the podcast will know, I'm fascinated by the idea that human decision-making can be a source of risk. In the case of museums, the biggest manifestation of that risk is that people don't show up. What the Weserburg decided to do is to change its pricing structure from a fixed fee to a pay-to-stay model, whereby they charged people for the length of time they spent in the museum. This intrigued me, because it's not something I've ever seen before, and it's a really interesting way of changing customer perception of what a museum visit entails. Ordinarily, changing how people think of a museum is a matter of what you show in it. But what this experiment did was to see if people's attitude towards visiting a museum could be changed by other means. The idea that changing reality is expensive, whereas changing people's perceptions can be significantly cheaper and more effective, is something that really fascinates me. It's relevant in so many fields, including compliance, risk, and other areas where we want to influence people's behaviours. If we can't change reality, change the perception of it. And if you charge an entry fee, price becomes one way you can do that. Tom Schössler is the man behind the experiment and my guest on this episode of the podcast. He's the managing director of the Weserburg. Tom teaches arts management at several universities and has written about pricing in the arts sector. What he had to say about the experiment was really interesting, and it highlights the real challenge of behavioural science. To work out whether something works, you need to experiment, and that takes courage. But what we can learn from it is fascinating, and this experiment is no exception. We recorded this episode before the coronavirus lockdown, but obviously the challenge of getting visitors through the door once the crisis is over is going to be even more acute than it was before for museums. As this series progresses, I'm looking to bring you different voices you won't have heard before, alongside academics and behavioural science practitioners. A museum director fits that bill perfectly. So please enjoy my conversation with Tom Schössler about his pay-to-stay behavioural science experiment. Tom, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you, Christian, for inviting me.
You're a very unusual guest, and as I explained in my introduction, the sorts of people I'm normally speaking to are not necessarily those that you would find in a museum. But I think what you've done is really innovative, really, sort of unusual. And I wanted to share that with my audience as an example, I think, of a very forward-thinking deployment of behavioural science, perhaps in a field where one might not normally think of it. So I guess to start, could you just explain a little bit about the museum that you work for and, what people could see there if they found themselves in Bremen?
Thanks for finding me and our little experiment. The museum is a rather large place. It's a former warehouse that was turned into a museum at the early 90s, and it is dedicated to contemporary art, which means any art production since the 1960s. And so that is usually a form of art that is rather difficult to access. It started with a minimal art and fluxes and conceptual works and into the very contemporary stuff. So what we see here, or what visitors see here, is sometimes quite challenging. And we also noticed that at the box office of the front desk, where people are uncertain what to expect. They come in and actually astonishing amount of people comes in and says, I read about this museum, but I really don't know what you have on show. So what do you have? And then it becomes difficult to explain. And then once we do, some are like, that sounds cool. I want to go in. And others are like, I'm not sure if that's for me. I don't know if I get it. I don't know if I understand, and so on and so forth. So we were looking for, or we are constantly looking for ways to make access to contemporary art easier for people who are no experts in the field.
I recognize that because going to a museum even going to a museum you're familiar with, you can have, I've always found you can have amazing experiences, or you can kind of not be inspired. And in a way that you might be if you went on a different day. So I love this idea that you've sort of analysed your audience's reaction and likely reaction to it, and kind of tried to neutralise that and remove any kind of impediment to going in.
Yeah, it's risk. It's a risk. You're investing your time, investing money, investing your intellectual capacity for a certain amount of time. And you want to get something out of it. I think that's the same with any form of free time or leisure activity. And some places make it easier for you to understand what you might be expecting, and others are more difficult. And I think we, with contemporary art, are a little more difficult to assess. So we're doing. We have multiple levers to do that. In the exhibition space, with material we provide, with the way we promote our exhibitions, and also with prices.
And so the thinking here was that people don't want to necessarily invest in a ticket, and I think in the article that I read, you said you'd love to make it free. But clearly economics prevents that from happening. And so what you're basically saying is, look, we recognize that there is a financial commitment to going to a museum, and you might not get the value, or you might be put off by the fact the entry prices. So in simple terms, if you come in and it's not for you, it's not going to cost you very much money. And if you decide to stay for longer, you're going to pay no more than you would have paid anyway. Is that right?
Exactly. I've done some research on pricing in Germany, and also was involved in a study that evaluated free admission to state museums, so I knew a little bit about the logic and the risk and the benefits of free admission and not. And what seems to be very difficult for museums is to make them socially more accessible. Meaning reaching audiences from low-income backgrounds with educational level that is not university level, and so museums are trying different things to make themselves more accessible to especially this kind of audience, which is really difficult. And I read a bit about the free admission in the national museums in the UK, and some seem to be more accessible through free admission to their collection, and others seem to be working, just as usual with the same form of audience. And in Germany, we don't have this kind of experience. Most museums in Germany, especially the large ones, they charge the usual day rate price, and only very few are experimenting, or larger museums are experimenting with free admission. And yet it seems to be difficult to use prices as the means to more accessibility. So we knew beforehand that our experiment would probably not reach those who are not interested, or those who stay away from museums for several reasons. And to some people, you may only charge €1 and they still wouldn't come to the museum, just because even €1 is too much for them, and we need to respect that. But for those who are interested, who would take the risk to explore contemporary art, to those who want to come back multiple times without buying the yearly pass, and to those who want to see a small show. We have 5,000 square meters, which is quite a lot of space, and we have really large exhibitions, but we have also exhibitions that only fill a room or two, and they're still very interesting to a certain audience. But we've noticed at the box office that they come and they know what they want to see, and they know that it's not a large exhibition, but we charge them the full day rate price, which is €9. It's not a whole lot, but it feels like they're paying to see the whole place while they only want to see one or two rooms, and that throws them off. So we were looking for possibilities to loosen that up. Many museums then charge for certain rooms or for certain exhibitions. That's very difficult here because of the architecture, and also because what you need to do is you need to label people in a certain way. For example, they only buy a ticket to the first floor, and then you need to make sure they don't go to the second floor. And that is both difficult and also not very nice for the audience. I was at a museum. They gave you a wristband, and basically at every room they make you show the wristband, and it's not a very nice experience. So we were looking for ways to change the perspective. And what we ultimately did is we applied a time-based or a pay-per-use system where visitors pay €1 per 10 minutes, but never more than the usual day rate of €9. And then they can decide which rooms to see and how much time to spend. And if they only want to see a room and they're through after 20, 30 minutes, they can leave and only pay for that. If they stay a whole day, they still pay the €9 day rate, essentially.
And so logistically, you walk in and you're given a ticket that says the time that you've walked in, and then you pay on exit. Is that how it works?
Exactly. Right now, we did it very manually. So we just print out a plain ticket and write down the time, the access time, and then ask people to come back before they leave to note down the time when they leave and calculate the price. It's very simple. It's an Excel sheet that we use to calculate the time. It's very basic. If we were to implement that permanently, I'm sure we find a smarter solution with maybe printing barcodes and scanning, and then maybe writing a little code that calculates the price automatically, that kind of thing. But right now, as we said, it's an experiment and it's a no budget experiment. We went that way, and it's fine. It's no problem at all for the audience. It's a little different for them to pay upon exiting instead of upon entry, but it has led to no problems at all.
And what was the reaction of people in terms of, one, what they said to you, and two, in terms of their behaviors?
Well, what they said to us is all positive. Some people come in and they're a little thrown off, and they're like, I'm not sure how long I want to stay. Is that a problem? And that happened more often than we thought, but we had to explain to them that it's of course no problem, and they can stay as long as they want, and they can only win. I think that's very important to mention that price cap, that the maximum price being the same as the usual day rate. That was very important for people to feel that they could only win with this experiment. If we had not implemented that, then technically, if somebody stayed for 3 hours, 180 minutes, €1 per 10 minutes, that's €18. That would have been a loss of trust, I think. So once people understood they could only win, and it wouldn't make a difference if they bought the usual day ticket or took part in the pay-as-you-stay experiment, as soon as they understand, they're all for it, obviously.
And so in terms of visitor numbers, what was the impact?
In our first experiment in our first round in December, we had an increase of 42%. Compared to the same 4 weeks in 2018, and since 2018 was already a quite good year, we also looked at the average 2014 to 2018, so a 5-year average, and compared to that, our experiment at the end of 2019 was 70% more visitors. I should add that we only do this for single ticket buyers. because guided tours or classes, seminars, and so on and so forth is still free or has its a fixed price. And I should also add that we have a lot of kids and young people coming, and thanks to a sponsor, they have free admission. So the experiment is only valid for a certain amount of the total audience, and within this share of the audience, we had a 40% increase and 70% compared to the 5-year average, respectively. Quite successful, I would say.
If your objective was getting more people through the door, clearly this works. And so the financial incentive and the curiosity around it kicks in. And in terms of the sort of the revenues for the museum, was it loss making or?
Well, we expected a little loss because anybody who leaves early pays less, but anybody who stays longer pays a maximum of €9. So we knew that the average price per person or per visit would decrease, and so it did. But the amount of more tickets sold eventually set off this financial loss per person. So revenue was pretty much the exact same as the year before.
So this is successful, right?
I would say. I mean, I was hoping for a little benefit financially, actually. That does not happen, as it doesn't with pay as you wish or pay what you can. Those kind of models also usually lead to more tickets sold, but lower income. I'm happy. I'm happy with stable income and more visitors. That's fine.
And so you did this over the Advent period, if I understand correctly.
Yes. 4 weeks before Christmas, exactly the Advent time. We were open 6 days a week, so there was 24 opening days, and the Advent is a good time to experiment with this kind of stuff because people are busy, and we see that in visitor numbers. December is not a great time with regard to numbers, so our risk was relatively low compared to other times of the year. Since if it had not worked, it would have only affected a not so heavy use month.
Right. So you're playing with a low risk kind of revenue and visitor stream.
Exactly. And it was also interesting to see because people actually do have little time in December. So we wanted to see if our incentive to actually pay less if you spend that little time you have at the museum, if that works. And it seems to have. And many people commented in the visitor survey that we did along with the experiment that they were able to use their limited time to spend it at the museum through this promotion.
And in terms of sort of carrying it forward to do more of this, is it something you might you think about doing again in the same period of the year or broaden out? What's the thinking there at the moment?
Well, after the positive results of the first experiment, and if you allow me, I'll go into some more positive findings. First, what we found that people were willing to recommend the museum more during the experiment than outside. We did a survey, as I mentioned, and we did it before the experiment, during, and after, so we could compare the normal times and the experiment time, and we asked for the Net Promoter Score, which indicates willingness to recommend this experience to friends and family. And we found that during the experiment, the willingness to recommend the museum was much higher than outside. So it had a positive effect on satisfaction, essentially. Also, we found that people, at least they say they would come more often to the museum. That's the problem with surveys. You ask hypothetical questions, and it's no proof that it works, but at least the indication is there. People said they would come more often if the price were always €1 per 10 minutes. And outside of the experiment, without that in place, the number one factor that people note as the barrier or a motivating factor is if I had more time. So under normal circumstances, people said, I would come more often if I had more time. But during the experiment, that argument, if I had more time, was set back to the second position with the pricing model taking first place. So it seems that it actually not only has this financial benefit, but it also has that effect on enabling people to use little time to go to the museum. I find that very interesting. Actually, I believe that time is actually the much bigger barrier than the money. It seems, experimenting with prices, you set financial benefits, but essentially, I believe that people like the benefit of being able to spend little time, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, without having the feeling of losing money. So it's sort of backwards, if you know what I mean.
But that's really interesting because I think what's fascinating about that is you have exposed in this experiment, and I'll call it what it is, right? It's a lie that we tell ourselves, or that people seem to tell themselves, around their behaviors. And what you've beautifully done here is if you shift the parameters, you've removed the ability to use a certain excuse. And you've now really started to expose some of the key drivers.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely to the point. And one thing that is a potential risk or a potential demerit of that model is that people might feel a rush. They might feel pressed for time. They might rush through the exhibition to save money. That is something we hear a lot as a counter argument, but that is not only, to my understanding, irrational. We also didn't notice that. So nobody really rushes through in order to save money. But what happens is that people end their visit when they're satisfied. And that is the basis of this whole idea was an article. I didn't even answer that you asked earlier. There is an academic article in 2010 by two Swiss economists, I believe, and they applied this pricing model, which is known from swimming pools and telephone contracts and many other circumstances. They applied that to museums, and they reflected upon the possible theoretical benefits and risks, and that was one risk that they mentioned, that people might feel rushed, but hardly anybody did. There were 4% in our survey that said they felt a pressure through the model, but I'm quite confident that at least also 4% feel obliged to stay longer than they like, because they feel they need to sit out the full price that they paid.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah. Wow. And so, presumably, have you had lots of museums coming to talk to you to ask about this?
Yeah. Quite a few colleagues called and expressed their content with the idea. It's funny because, my sort of business side colleagues, they're all very interested, and they asked, how did you do it? And what was the technical side of it and so on. And the artistic side of the museum, they are quite reserved because they feel like it's selling out art. And it takes some discussion to let them know what we actually intend to do with it. Which as we mentioned is make the museum more accessible, but they argue that people wouldn't take the time to enjoy art that in the way that they usually do. But we couldn't find any indication in our survey or in our conversations with the audience that this actually happens. No, there's no. I wish I had more time, but I wanted to save €1 or €2, so I left early. That really did not happen. Plus, and that's also interesting, when we talk about studying museum visits, we usually look at visits and maybe time spent. And this experiment sets a focus on the time spent in the museum. but we did not evaluate any form of behavior inside the museum. So we did not look how people spent their time. So we do not know if people maybe came to and used this pricing model to look at only one or two works, or maybe visit their favorite artist, or to enjoy the view from the top floor. We don't know, and that's an interesting thing that museums tend to do is that, if you will, paternalistic view on visitors, that the time spent correlates with the quality of the art experience.
And it's interesting when you talk like that, because obviously when one thinks about what potential you have as a museum to change the nature of people's experience, we tend to think in physical terms, right? Which is moving things around, change the flow, maybe open for longer hours. But what you've done here is taken the existing dynamics and just shifted people's perception of those. And so in a way, you've probably created a different kind of museum experience for people, albeit one that we don't necessarily have a full understanding of all the dynamics of.
That's true. I mean, it seems to my research, there's no other museum that used this type of model before, or at least not in that scale. So we have no comparison. I'd be happy if anybody could, give me a call or drop me an email that if they have seen or experienced this before, and I would love to have an exchange with colleagues and see what their experiences are. And I truly hope that a few museums pick up the idea and try it out themselves, so we can see what it actually does in different circumstances. But yeah, true, the museum experience, if you involve the price as part of the experience, then we have changed the consisting or the existing logic a little bit. But at the same time, a lot of people do mention that it did not change them. It's funny because we have I think half the people in the December timeframe, half the people that came said they knew before that this was going on, and of this half, about 40% said they came because of the pricing experiment. So roughly 20% came because of it. So a main question is it only an attraction, or is it something that can work permanently? And if they say they came because of it, does it mean they came because they can have a cheap museum visit, or is it because it actually changed their decision behavior? Did it shift the set of arguments for a museum visit? Because I believe that anybody who decides to visit a museum, they check, do they have the time? Is it good to reach? How do I get there? Do I have somebody to go with? Am I in good health? Actually, that's something in an aging society. That's something we experience more and more often, that people stop coming because they're not in good health anymore. So and you have all these factors, and price is one of many, and usually one that is not the major factor for visiting a museum. So the interest in the art or in the content is what drives people to museums. But if we can then find instruments to to support this decision, then I believe we should try it.
And I was fascinated when you were saying, you're not aware of anyone else that's doing it. So, I think your publicity will hopefully sort of flush them out if they exist. But what I think is really, really cool about this is that you have taken a format that is very traditional, and the model that you described is sort of what I expect when I go to a museum. I have a rough idea that there's going to be a charge. There may be a charge for extra exhibitions, and then there'll be an annual option for people that live nearby. And maybe there's an option if there's lots of museums in the town that I can buy a ticket for all of them. Yeah. But you've completely subverted that piece. And I think this is really cool because it's one of those things that could turn out to be like a revolution in museum going, where, other people copy it, and in 20 years' time, we look back and go, why is any museum charging on a different basis? Or it might just be a one-off experiment that nobody else got. And I think this is really, this is why I wanted to talk to you, because I think it's really exciting that you're experimenting with these dynamics in a field where I don't think pricing experimentation feels like a natural thing to do. Maybe for private museums, but certainly for the sort, the sort that you have. This is a really interesting kind of space to be testing this stuff out.
Yeah, it's true. Well, many, especially the public museums or state-run museums, they're quite limited because they have a lot of rules to follow, and they might not even be the ones. Management might not even be the one deciding prices. It might be something that the municipality or the ministry decides about. I hope actually, yes, that positive experiments like this, it would be a step if that could lead to politicians and administrators giving more power to museums to make those kind of experiments. I think that would be a great first step. Especially in the public field. And other than that, it might be a good idea to some museums. It might be not so good an idea to other museums. We know from free admission that museums benefit the most if they have a central location, because people pass by and they make a spontaneous decision to go in because there's no financial barrier. Museums located more outside of the city, then the price is ranked even lower than it is usually, because, for example, the way to get there is even more of a barrier. So it might not be introduced in everywhere. It might not become the default pricing structure, but I'm certain that some museums could really benefit from it.
Well, look, thank you so much for your time. As I said at the beginning, you were an unusual guest, but I found this absolutely fascinating. And I think your willingness to experiment serves all of us very well as an example that there are, opportunities, I think, to change people's behavior through changing their perception. And so I will watch with huge amounts of interest as you progress down this path, and I'm sure, based on what you've said, that you'll be testing more of these sorts of things out. And I will make a commitment that I made to you when I asked you onto it. The next time I am back in Bremen, I will absolutely come in and visit under whichever pricing structure you happen to have in place at the time. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Christian, and be my guest anytime in Bremen. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I think it's great that you explore behavioral science, and thanks Steve.
Thank you so much. So that's it for another episode. My huge thanks, Dankeschön, to Tom for appearing, and to you for listening. You can find out more about the Weserburg Museum of Modern Art and Tom's other academic work that includes pricing experiments in the arts in the show notes. Do also remember to pay the Weserburg a virtual visit now at weserburg.de, that's WESERBURG.de, and then in reality when you've made that long overdue trip to the city of Bremen when we're allowed to travel again. If you're not already subscribed to the Human Risk podcast, you'll find it wherever you get your quality audio content. Thanks again for listening, please stay safe, and I'll see you very soon for another episode of the Human Risk podcast.